change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
Hey everyone, we're back for another episode of the Fundraising AI podcast. Myself, Nathan Chappell, and my partner in all things AI, Scott Rosenkrantz, are here to give you the latest, greatest news on AI and all things that are happening in the AI world this week. Scott, you're really dressed up for this episode.
I'm just trying out something new. I also happen to be at a conference, and so I'm dressed up for the conference. But maybe I'll try wearing suits for the podcast.
Yeah, I did that for a lot of years. I think I'll take a hard pass on the suits as I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt today here in Southern California. Well, let's dive into that. Since you are at a conference, I was at a conference, got back last night. One of the things I was thinking about on my flight home was just how much has changed in terms of AI adoption, assimilation, whatever you want to call it, transformation in our field, in the nonprofit field, in the fundraising field, compared to maybe what conferences looked like a few years ago and as it related to AI topics, sessions, things like that. Why don't you share first where you're at? It's a conference that you and I have been to many times over the last decade, and you have professional experience in that role. Why don't you break it down?
Yeah. So I'm in Seattle at APRA-PD 2024. I started as a prospect researcher 15 years ago. This is my home base, kind of. But yeah, there's definitely a lot more AI sessions here. I'm talking to people a lot more about how to actually use it, not just like, hey, you should use it, but here's some examples of how you can use it. I am finding that there's a lot more case studies of clients saying, here's what we've seen with it. Here's recommendations on how to deploy it. Less about it's this thing in the world and you need to start using it. But there is still a lot of noise you need to sift through, right? I mean, we know everybody's trying to say that they have AI. Plenty of people who don't have AI, they're trying to dispel it and say you shouldn't use it because it's not all it's cracked up to be. Generative AI is getting thrown with predictive AI, and it's all getting conflated and confused by people that it's all one and the same. I can't tell you how many times I heard examples of generative AI image creation and how you might have 6 fingers on a hand, so you shouldn't use AI altogether. That's a bit extreme. And as we know, predictive is not the same as gen.
So I guess the question is, how accepting or rejecting is the field? I want to go back because you said APRA-PD very quickly. I think a lot of our listeners have no idea what APRA or PD is. APRA is an association in the nonprofit sector, the American Prospect Research Association. So this is a group of individuals who do research on donors and potential donors to an organization. The prospect development conference at APRA-PD is the time where everybody gets together once a year and talks about what's going well, what's not going well, where is the sector going from the prospect researcher kind of lens and point of view. So you've been going, I mean, you were a prospect researcher in your first version of a nonprofit career many years ago. So the mindset pretty well, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think the biggest barrier is to adoption? You work with a lot of fundraisers, you work with a lot of other sectors as well. Is the prospect development either more willing or less willing to adopt AI and the things that they're doing, either more accepting or rejecting? And have you seen a change over the last couple of years?
I think there's less hesitancy to use it altogether. I think people are starting to see like, let's use predictive AI. There is a lot of value in that, right? Granted, when I say people, I mean, there's still a small number. Not every single organization is using predictive AI, but we're seeing more and more see the success of predictive AI. I think there's still a lot of hesitancy on generative in this space, right? And I mean, we've talked about this before. And again, I started as a prospect researcher. I use it to come up with kind of profiles on any guests that we have joining the podcast, right? So, which is something that I probably would have done very similarly if I was still a prospect researcher. So I would have used this day in and day out. I was talking to someone at this conference saying it takes them between 6 hours and a day and a half to put together one profile.
And they're still doing that
Which is
today, like in
insane.
2024.
Doing it
And
today.
are they
Yeah.
saying like, this is my job and I'm proud of that job?
And that there's no way that Gen AI could do that for me. I'm sitting there like, you haven't tried it. You haven't looked at it. You haven't even thought about it.
Yeah.
There's no way it can't do that for you.
I had two interesting experiences. Last week, I was at Meals on Wheels USA at their national conference. It was all their affiliates and partners that work with Meals on Wheels nationally. It was one of the most accepting groups of AI I've ever had. I did a keynote
awesome.
at their conference and then I did a workshop after. It was standing room only and people didn't want to leave. People were coming up after and taking pictures. Like they just wanted to know, like, what do you use and how do I do this to help support my job? And then this week I was in Indianapolis, just got back last night from the Foundation for Fraternal Excellence, which is an association of fraternities and sororities that work together. These are groups that build community and lifelong relationships in a responsible way. It was one of the least educated groups in AI that I had had, and actually more palpable resistance to it. So it sounds like we've had similar weeks where this technology is not new. It's existed for a while. And if you don't know if AI can help you in your job, all you have to do is ask it. But I think the reasons why people are not using it are kind of similar. I think one is there's fear that it's going to change or replace my job. Maybe the human instinct is just double down on what you do and then maybe no one will notice. But I think it's actually more. I think that the excuse at least is made that it's not accurate and I can't trust it, right? Sometimes it's the word hallucination, that these models hallucinate, which when they came out, they did around 12% of the time. Now they're about 5%. And by next year, they think they'll be in the single digits, if not gone. But to your point, you see an image that Taylor Swift posts or whoever it might be, and there's like something weird about it, incorrect about it. You're like, oh, I can't trust any of it. I know you're a big Perplexity fan because Perplexity by default, if you do these profiles of our podcast guests, they show up. It's not 100% perfect, but it shows you every single thing that it did. And it gives you a link for the source by default. You don't have to tell it like accuracy is important to me. It just says, here's your answer or your possible answers to this thing. And here's all the sources. It's hard for me to fathom that a person wants to wake up every day and spend a day to half a day to write a profile of someone. You have this almost like a quantum computer in your pocket to do this exact task.
It's so much easier to verify sources than to go out and find and compile sources.
Yeah.
I'd rather have a tool bring that all to me, put it at my fingertips, and then I just have to go through and make sure that what it's saying is actually accurate.
Yeah. We've said this for a long time. There's still a need and a role for prospect researchers and prospect development. If you can offload routine or mundane things, and that's what AI does, it creates efficiency by offloading things that are rules-based or routine, but then you apply human wisdom and intuition and human strategy, those individuals become the backbone of a nonprofit organization by becoming an analyst, by becoming a strategist, by offload those things, give yourself the dividend of time, like a massive dividend of time. I'd say prospect researchers could easily be on the top end of efficiency. So we're talking like 50 to 60% of time savings based on routine tasks. Re-equip yourself as a strategist to say, okay, I still need to use human judgment to verify all these things and make sure they're accurate. I also have human wisdom because I can think about correlations between, oh, that person's related to the financial advisor at this other institution that also gave this gift to another one, like things that are outside the scope of a generative model, add those in, but spend the rest of my time. So that becomes 40% of your time. And 60% of your time is like, look at all this data. How do we activate this data? How do we move someone forward, not just with a higher chance of success, but faster and with a higher chance of success? I think that's the call out. We did a whole session early on for prospect researchers, but I still firmly believe that this area is so uniquely positioned to benefit from responsible and beneficial AI to double down on it. It does seem, though, based on the conversation that you and I had earlier, there are at least more sessions on AI at the conference this year than there has been prior. Is that right?
Definitely more sessions and actual case studies, right? Not the theoretical, not here's what it is, not the educational, but like I am a client, I'm using it, this is success I've seen, this is recommendations I have. Like it's been a long time. I don't know if at the Microsoft conference, there were a lot of case studies. I don't know if I've been to many other conferences that have case studies of people actually seeing success with AI.
Yeah.
It's more just like us going out there and saying, hey, you should be using it if you are.
Yeah, that's a new thing, right? And you and I have gotten more people from nonprofits coming to us and saying, hey, we are doing some really cool stuff with AI. And it's so exciting. I don't think that was happening even 6 months ago. Not surprising. The technology, ChatGPT came out almost 2 years ago. So what we're talking like or 18, 19 months ago, we're starting to see use cases of organizations that are really benefiting. Use cases take time. You've got to, do something new. You got to test it out. You got to iterate and test it. I've been thinking a lot about our sector and where we're at today. And I woke up this morning and texted our friend at Microsoft, who's been a great sponsor of fundraising. I woke up thinking that when we compare and contrast the nonprofit sector to the private sector, we are passively using AI. We're picking up tools, trying them out, all the different bottled water. We figure out which one works for our sector, passively using it. But where we're missing is that we don't have active goals for what we want to achieve with it. And this was going back, and I probably shared this on a previous podcast with Lucille Packard Children's Hospital in a really great conversation we had in San Francisco a few weeks ago. And it was really like, what an opportunity to sit down and whiteboard. Where do we want to be in 2 years or 3 years? Like, how do we want to use AI to create a dividend of time that equates to 1 day a week for every person on our team? That's super powerful. Like to be able to like get away from just this passive use. I'm like, oh, I'm going to use a tool because it's just going to save me some time or some frustration. But to say, okay, we as an organization are going to take an active stance toward what we want to achieve in the next 2 to 3 years. And I think that's where we need to better understand the return on investment on AI. It's not about just raising more money. It's not about, even for nonprofits, delivering their mission better. It's about delivering your mission better, but also having a happier workforce at the end, right? To be able to do more of those things. And so we should do a podcast on the ROI of AI. And I know we talk about it a lot in our sessions, but it deserves attention, because if you don't really understand what the return on investment is for these things, you're going to continue just to use it passively or reject it actively because you're like, well, I don't really see the value of it, and I like my job and I don't want my job to change. So I think that's got to be an episode coming up.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I do, just going back a little bit, like I'm still seeing a lot of organizations that, I mean, maybe they've come a long way over the past couple of years, but they still have a long ways to go, who are saying our team has come together, our leadership has come together, and we now are ready for AI.
Right.
So now we're looking at different tools, which goes to what you were saying about passive. They're not starting with a use case, with a challenge that they want to address, and then going out to find the tools that can address that challenge.
Yeah.
Their challenge is that they don't have AI, and they're trying to just get a tool to check that box.
Yeah. I remember
it could be generative, it could be predictive, it could be anything.
Yeah. I remember you and I got a call. I don't know if you remember this, a couple of years ago. This is before generative, and got a call from a person who was like, my boss told me that we need to use AI. Can you explain what AI is? And I mean, and that's still happening today. I mean, to your point, like I think a lot where it's like, oh, I've got FOMO now, and everything has changed and we're not in the game, so we better get in the game. But you shared this analogy a bunch of times, and I use it in every deck I have now, which is like you have a toolbox and you have different tools, and you don't use a hammer to cut a piece of wood and you don't use a saw to hammer a nail. You pick the right tool for the right application. And otherwise everyone's going to be frustrated and you're not going to have good results, like hammering that nail with a saw. And so I think at the end of the day, to your point, slow down, better to understand and isolate what you're trying to achieve, what that gap is or what that opportunity is, and then find the type of AI that's appropriate, the tool that's appropriate for that job.
Yeah. And usually like that's unfortunately not the way that it goes. I mean, you and I are both seeing this, nonprofits who know that they need to get a little bit further ahead in that direction and are asking us like to come and do just that education. Like, what is it? What do we need to do? What do we need to think about? Like, how can we get started on that path? Because you are going to need those external resources, or at least rely on them if they're available. Yeah. Right. Instead of just trying to come internally. You can't solve the problem if you're approaching it the same way that got you into that problem. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And it might be that people just are lacking basic information on where to start. And you want to, whenever you and I do a session, I think inevitably it ends with like, but where do I log in from certain individuals? The good thing is, I think that we end up creating a certain amount of comfort and curiosity that people are willing to go look up those tools. We should do another session on just basics, but not maybe from us, because we already did a AI 101. But Tim Lockey just released his AI for anyone. And I think in quotes, it was like even my mom. And Allie K. Miller with her LinkedIn Live or LinkedIn Learning presentation that's 48 minutes, and Connor Grennan. So there's lots of resources. If you're listening to this podcast and you're like, hey, this is helpful because I'm increasing my AI fluency, but I still need a primer on the basics. There's our tools, and we could put links in the show notes. I know we have a couple just updates. It's not, I don't know if it's a slow week for AI updates, but it wasn't like there was anything profound. There weren't any big, huge product releases, but there were a couple things that caught my attention that I think worth sharing. And then let's round out the podcast today with, I think, one of my bigger tips that I've learned to use generative for, and actually some of the benefits that I've gotten from that. But the one that got my attention, as you and I are both like always listening to podcasts and reading news, was XAI. So of course it's Twitter, formerly known, or X, formerly known as Twitter. I hope we stop saying that sometime soon. But it's like Meta, formerly known as Facebook. It's just kind of ridiculous. But XAI, which is, again, we've shared our sentiment on this before. We try not to pass judgment, but a model will reflect the data that it's trained on. Twitter, by design, essentially is a very divisive, I guess, if you will, or polarizing data set of overall. And not to say one is good or the other is bad. It's just that there are two very large bodies of data that represent extreme points of view. And that's not a bad thing, again, if you could understand where the middle and the intersection is, and then mine that data to understand where harmony is. And that's where Harmony Labs works to really understand, like, what are the things that these two very disparate factions have in common with one another, and let's use AI to create a guide. But that's a positive use case of X. On the downside, you have a bot that essentially was created directly with all of the data, so the divisive data set, but also created with an attitude deliberately. So this is like, you have to fine tune a model. Like always, generative AI is like bottled water. They're all the same. It's the same transformer technology. The fine tuning is such that I want to tell this one to be a little snarky, and not surprising that Elon wanted his AI to be snarky. No one's surprised by that. But Grok, their AI, which is only available to subscribers, was released this week, which is the image creator in Grok, which is similar to DALL-E 3 or Midjourney, which creates images based on text or verbal prompts. So I want to show me a picture of whatever. We know that Google got into this a while back and had all kinds of issues almost immediately when people are asking it to rewrite history and essentially depict Black Nazis and things like that. Grok AI image generator was released this week without any restrictions as a deliberate act, right? So like Google retracted very, very quickly, like shareholders did not like that. But X released this and said, hey, we're going to have this image generator with no restriction, including for political figures and political characters. So not here to pass judgment, but here to say, holy moly, like, hold on and like wait till what we see and be ready for some amazingly creative and probably horrifying things. But also in an election year, which most people hypothesized a year ago, like AI is going to wreak havoc on the election, the 2024 election. This is how it will do that. I think what that means is that for every individual to ensure that you are, in fact, seeing an image, because photorealistic quality, like these are not distinguishable in many cases from, like, they don't look like a Picasso, right? They look like an actual person doing a thing in a photorealistic way. One of the things that I would encourage people, if there's a photo that you're not sure if it's real, put it in GPT and ask it, is this image real? There are some new things, and I don't think we covered this last week, but I think it's C2PA, which if I create a DALL-E image now is, I don't know if you knew this, it's watermarked by compliance. So OpenAI complied even way before. There's no government regulation on this yet, but it's watermarked. So when I upload an image, which I did on LinkedIn the other day when I wrote my love letter to the nonprofit sector, it immediately knew that that image was created. That was not original work, that it was actually artificially created. And it puts a little stamp, like a logo stamp, a CP stamp down in the corner of it. And that's super comforting to me. Like, it's okay if you want to create images that don't have any boundaries or barriers, if they can be watermarked and distinguished that they are not true, right? Because the biggest fear is that somebody took this photo of this person with this other person to find out, and it was not watermarked, that it was actually portraying itself to be genuine when it was not.
And so to clarify, was it LinkedIn that watermarked the AI generated image you uploaded to it, or was it DALL-E 3 that watermarked the image that it created?
Both. So OpenAI actually agreed to the C2PA standard, and then LinkedIn knew to look for that standard. And so when LinkedIn uploaded the image, it knew to look in the watermark.
Cool.
And then when I scroll down, the last couple images that I've used literally have a little logo next to them. Now, I haven't tried this yet, but I'm pretty sure it'd be easy to get rid of the logo by essentially taking that image, even exporting it as a PDF, re-uploading it as PDF, and or whatever other format you'd want, because you could remove the watermark essentially from the code of it by changing the format of the image. So obviously always ways to get around that, but I think anything that we can do to create transparency about what's genuine and what's not, and let people decide, what is appropriate and what is not. So yeah, that was my big moment, but stay tuned. And honestly, don't even stay tuned, just be aware so that you can know that these tools are super powerful and they're able to build images at scale with photo quality for sure.
Yeah. And Google Pixel phone is coming under fire, just like Google tends to do, right? Where in their new Pixel release on the software, you can take a photo that's in your photo library, and while being in your photo library, add images to it, right? Add a person to it, remove a person from it. And people are adding things like car wrecks or bomb wreckage or drug paraphernalia, right? So you could be creating, to your point, this photorealistic image that doesn't exist while standing in line for your Starbucks, and then put it out for misinformation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, in this election year, like, it is just so easy for anyone to do this. You don't have to be sophisticated. You just have to be curious and malicious.
Yeah.
And have a Google phone.
I wonder if the answer is going to be, well, now that there's C2PA, which is that standard for recognizing an image as watermarked, it's like, oh, it's all fair because Mickey Mouse holding an Uzi or whatever is, everyone knows it's not real because it has a C2PA logo on it. I wonder if the tech providers are going to take the path of least resistance, because regulating is super hard, right?
Probably.
I mean, we've seen that backfire on a lot of tech companies, because like, who's to say you're revising history according to who? And then they become the guardians of what correct. We know a lot of things that are in history books that actually are not true, that just became somebody's agenda at a certain point. So yeah, it's going to be really, really interesting. I think it almost a full reversal from when generative AI started with image generation, which anything went, to nothing went. Now everything will go again, but it will have a little watermark, which again, I'd argue would be very, very easy to remove. So yeah, I think those are two interesting things that happened this week. I think for me, in my practical journey of AI, and you and I are literally, I think probably before 9 a.m. on any given day, you and I are doing something in AI, both either in our professional job. So I guess it's fair. We're in it almost from the time we wake up until the time we go to bed, because it's what we do for a living. But even on the generative side, where we just are trying to do our work better, faster, and be happier at the end by offloading crap work to a Gen AI tool, I maybe I got concerned that the AI I like today is not going to be around for a long time. And maybe it's because I watched the movie Her, and maybe it's because Joaquin Phoenix had this relationship. Yeah. Well, Pi, right? So Pi is an AI tool. It's like I paid for it, I invested in it, and you trained it, and it was supposed to be your personal AI assistant. So whatever, it's a movie Her, whatever. And that I just became pretty aware that I don't think I was getting the results from GPT-4o that I was wanting in my voice, but also I was a little bit concerned. I'm like, that's not the only tool I'm ever going to use. And I like to use Claude for other things. So I created a folder, and this is just such an easy tip for everyone. And I really encourage it. This is the thing. If you don't do this today, in 2 years from now, you're going to really regret it. Anytime you write a LinkedIn post, copy that text and put it in a folder. Anytime you write a blog, or if you write a document or you publish something, take a copy of it, put it in Word, create a PDF of it, either one, doesn't matter, put it into a folder. I have a folder now on my desktop that is literally called Content About Me. And it's just content that I've written. And so I put this in the folder, which one gives me a lot of comfort, because a new Gen AI tool that comes out tomorrow, which I'm sure there will be another one that comes out tomorrow, I can really quickly train that tool on what my voice is because I have a body of work in a folder that I curated. Like that's all about me, and it's stuff that I wrote, and it's my voice. So I took that folder, and it took me a little while. It took me like, I don't know, an hour maybe to like go through different things. I'm like, oh yeah, I wrote that article for them, and I wrote that blog, and I created a PDF of a couple articles and longer posts that I had published on LinkedIn from a year ago, whatever it might be. Put those in, both PDFs, Word document, doesn't matter, or text file. And now I've got this body of work that I literally can say, okay, GPT-4o, this is about me. These are the things that I've written before, and I want you to remember this. And so this is a new advancement because a few months ago, 2 months ago, maybe GPT-4o came up with a thing where it's called memory, and it can update its memory across all threads. It's not specific to a single thread where it used to be. It runs across all threads. And Claude has the same thing called artifacts. And I will tell you, so I did that, 2 weeks ago. I gave a prompt to GPT-4o maybe a day or two after that. And I said, I want to write this thing about this thing. And this is a style. And I want you to reference the things that I've written before and my orientation around AI and generosity. It was the first time that GPT had created something that I couldn't tell the difference between my voice and it.
Which is crazy.
It's crazy.
Crazy. Like this thing, again, has still only been out 18 months.
Yeah.
And you can't tell the difference between something that you wrote on your own and that I crafted.
So there's two tips with this. So one is creating this folder, call it whatever about me. It's things that I've written, whatever. And then write things. It could be emails. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a prolific writer about this. And create that folder and keep that folder up to date because you're not going to want to use it just for one AI. You're going to want to use it for others. But the other trick, and I think we've shared this on the podcast, is that I got in the habit a few months ago that anytime I would ask GPT for, say, can you give me an idea for this LinkedIn post or whatever? And then I go through and maybe it'd get me like 60% there, which is pretty good. Like it saved me 60% of my time basically. And so I could go through and edit it. I got in the habit of taking the final product. And the easiest path is just like, oh, I post on LinkedIn, forget about it. But take the extra step. When you're done with your final version and before you submit it or even after you submit it, copy that final post, put it back in GPT and say, this is the final version. So it knew what it gave me the first time. And now it knew what I actually submitted and hit send on. And it knew exactly the differences in what I had changed. So I think the difference between like continuing to train this memory update and front loading it with context about me and content that I've written before, it got me to the point where it got me 90% there. And that was pretty amazing. I'd heard other people that had gotten to this place about 6 months ago, and I was like, how did they do it? And I think it's just bugged me. And it's there. And I think it will just only get better from here on.
That's awesome. And I love this strategy. I've done similar things, not to the extent that you have. I fed in a bunch of my emails and I said, create a style guide for my language, right? Mm-hmm. Talk about like vocabulary and length and tone and voice. I pulled out that style guide and then I took that style guide and put it into a bunch of my GPTs and said, whenever you write something, write it in this language. And it is close, but I still have to do a lot of tweaking. I haven't done that feedback loop of saying, here's what you wrote, here's what I tweaked.
Yeah.
Remember that. But I mean, the way you make it, it's very easy to just kind of pull everything and do it in that moment.
So
instead of having to go back and pull it all together.
Yeah. So I met someone this week who is a writer for a nonprofit, and she writes for the president of her, I think it was a college or a university. And of course, it's a big thing. It's like pay a writer to write in the voice. That person has to learn essentially over like a lot of time years, like got to read everything that president of the university ever wrote or ever any speeches that they had done and kind of review those transcripts and do that. And sharing the same thing with her is that those are well-documented speeches. If you're a writer for someone else in their voice and you have documented speeches, and to be honest, even if those speeches are on YouTube, you could take the transcript from the YouTube speech, then put it in a Word document, PDF it, whatever. You now have like a great body of knowledge for an AI to learn from and to be able to replicate that voice. And my biggest telltale sign of something that's created with an AI, with a Gen AI, is the word delve. It's like in this thing, like if we use AI to like take our transcripts and then say, what are profound quotes that came from this or what are 3 different highlights? it uses the word delve all the time. As we delve into the data or we delve into this conversation, in no case in this latest version, I was like over the moon, it didn't use the word delve because I've never used the word delve in my own individual writing. And so all to say, this is a moving target. But yeah, if people have questions about this, definitely reach out to Scott or I. The thing I love about where we're at in this AI transformation is that we're learning alongside you. And we learn from you and you learn from us. And we kind of share in this great perpetual feedback loop. No one has this all figured out. There's no rule. There's no definitive guide for how to use it. And if there was, it would be obsolete tomorrow. But there is general direction on how AI could be used to support a wide variety of functions and operations, and that will continue to evolve over time. So only other thing I wanted to announce was 11 Labs. They launched their global reader app with 32 languages. You and I are both big fans of 11 Labs. I don't know if I told you because we were both traveling this week. I actually broke down and actually paid for the creator subscription. And I've started the process of actually professionally cloning my voice so that I'm going to test it out with you to see when I'm done. But you have to use a lot of voice. Like actually, I have like literally 4 to 8 hours of voice where I'm recording. And then when my recordings are done, I'll upload those. You could take the shortcut where you only need 4 minutes, but it's like go big or go home, right? I don't want to do the 4-minute version.
Did I tell you I had Apple clone my voice?
No.
So Apple has in their accessibility for a couple months now, you can, for people who have generative disorders that they're losing their voice, there's like 150 different phrases that you speak into your phone and then it'll clone your voice. So I have it. It's good. Marcus Brownlee does a video of it on his MKBHD podcast, but it just doesn't have a lot of emotion, right? Because it's telling me to read these phrases and it's like, look over there's a cat in the tree, but I'm not saying it in the same emotion that I would if it actually happened. So it's very like,
look over there.
Monotone,
there's the cat in the tree.
But it's in my voice.
Right.
It took like 15 minutes. It's pretty wild.
That's awesome. We should put a link to that in the show notes as well. So on just how to do that. Yeah. So more to come on that. We are not going to replace Scott or I on this podcast, just so you know. But I did it because I want to test something out and see how convincing it is, obviously, because I'm just nerdy that way. I think that's all we have time for today. We're at 35 minutes. Thank you for everyone. We continue to get awesome feedback. I'm traveling a lot. You're traveling a lot. People come up to us all the time and they're just like, we listen to your podcast while I'm driving or I'm jogging or whatever. And it's just helpful creating my AI fluency. We'd love to hear that. We'd love to hear the feedback. If you have examples of new and creative and things that you're doing with AI in your organizations, let us know. We'd love to highlight those. If there are things that you've learned the hard way, we'd like to know those too, and just to help each other and kind of, again, this continual feedback loop. But Scott, I'm so glad you dressed up for this. I think it just raised the bar so much on the podcast. I'm going to expect that you do this every time now.
Yeah, and it's going to be a tux next time. For those of you who haven't registered for the virtual summit, I was at the Donor Search Happy Hour last night and talking about how conferences are not really AI specific and it's either nonprofits or it's AI, and except for the Microsoft one that we went to. And someone said, oh, except for the Fundraising AI virtual summit. And it was weird to hear someone else reference that to me.
Yeah.
That I had just met.
And
so
shame.
For those of you who are listening, if you haven't registered yet, register.
And shame you on that. Yes, actually, that's insane. Like we're like, I don't know, 6 weeks away. We're 6 weeks away, less than 6 weeks away from the second annual summit. So definitely. If you don't do anything else today, like don't even eat dinner or breakfast or whatever, literally go to .ai, click on summit, register. It's free. And then take that link and send it to everyone. You're going to be joined by 10,000 people from 100 countries. And we have amazing speakers this year. I cannot wait. I know you and I are going to be in San Francisco for that, for our live kind of preview party on that. And also at the same time, we'll be celebrating the release of Mallory's new book, which is available on Amazon, called What the Fundraising, which I love the title so much. And her podcast, What the Fundraising, also, which happens to also come out October 1st. So we have lots of things to celebrate. So thanks for that heads up. We'll definitely put a link to fundraising.ai in the show notes so that you can just click on that one link and get signed up. So awesome, Scott. Have a safe rest of not a safe rest of your conference. Hopefully it's a safe conference, but maybe safe travels on the way home.
I never know.
I mean, if those prospect researchers coming out angry, I mean, maybe they just overheard what you talked about and it's going to get, there's going to ready to rumble. But have a safe trip back and we'll talk to everyone soon. Take care, everyone.